So the summary of the updates we have this year, we created 31 new account codes, 12 deleted account codes from last year's chart of accounts. We had numerous updates or mappings to the BFR fields. We have 23 new account codes descriptions which were introduced, and one summary account code description change. This summary actually applies to 4 different account codes. And if you look at the right-hand side of your screen there, you can see a comparative analysis of updates that have been running through the years. And between this year and last year we had 41 new account codes, but this year there's a drop to 31 account codes, and there was one deleted account code last year as against 12 new 12 deleted account codes which were introduced this year. So how do you find out about these updates? So like I said, we have one major update which was published every year when new and deleted account codes are released. This was published last Thursday here, and as against last financial year where we usually release the updates around spring, but due to the election this year, when the announcement the elections were called, there had to be a little hold up due to some internal ramifications, and that was why it was delayed this year. So within the year, we also have minor updates, but this is just relation to mapping and description changes, especially pre-account returns. And details of these updates, you can go to the guides to adopting the chart of accounts, and you'll get this under section 5, updates to the 2024-25 chart of accounts, and also charts of accounts spreadsheet, where if you go under the tab on the change control 2024 to 24-25, and also the tab of the chart of account structure mapping. I will usually highlight this yellow rows and cells for easy identification. So the payment providers are also they also receive notifications whenever we have such updates. However, this mapping for determination is processed by us here at the DFE and not by the FMS providers. Next slide, please. So what are our criteria for adding new account codes? So I'll need to hand you over to my colleague now, Nikki of the DFE, who will also run through the criteria and the various technical account mapping and ramifications. Thank you. So over to you, Nikki.
Thanks, Zeno. So just to give you a little bit of background as to our thinking when we add new account codes, we don't add them easily because we don't want the account structure to get too big. We already realise that there are a lot of account codes there, so we do want to keep any updates to a minimum. So we do kind of run each new account code through a business case internally to make sure that it is it's right to add it to the account code, the list of account codes. I guess the first things are if it's a result of a new financial reporting requirement, or a new field in the accounts return, which is normally the result of a new financial reporting requirement. Then obviously if there's no suitable account code already, then we'd have to make sure that we set up a new account code so that when you do your returns, you've got that expenditure separated and ready to complete those fields. But there are also other, I guess, slightly more minor reasons why we would increase changes. So, well, actually, ministerial requests. That's quite a rare one this year, but this year we have got some updates based for the ICT account codes. But we also take into account other considerations. So, is it a long time span? Is it something that's got will it be used for more than 5 years? We consider the materiality in terms of how we collect the data centrally and also within the trust. Is it material? Also, we think about, is it going to be common across the sector? Even if it is just for primary phase, if it affects most of primary schools, for example, nursery, we added a code for nursery income a couple of years ago, so we know that that's not going to affect secondaries, but it's pretty much going to affect all the primary sector. So we kind of consider those sort of things, and also the numbers of requests that we get from trusts as well, for new account codes that have come through through our query streams. So for those, I mean, sometimes we've had them, we get the odd one here and there, and as they build up, you get more and more. So it might not be that we add them as soon as we get the first query, but then if we kind of have got a few queries over the years, so for example, we've added an account code for swimming this year, and that's probably our most asked for account code, but we've had those requests right from the beginning. Because it's not been particularly material, we haven't really set that account code up before, but we've had so many requests for it that we've ended up adding that. So as of last year, there were about 35% of trusts using the Academy Chart of Accounts. So we thought that was a really good time to consult with trusts to find out how usable the Academy Chart of Accounts was. So we sent out a questionnaire last October to known trusts, to trusts that were known to be using the Academy Chart of Accounts, to find out, what account, what worked well, what account codes were missing. Was there any confusion around some of the account codes that were there? Was there some ambiguity around some of the codes? So we got 38 really detailed responses from that, and as a result, we have actually added those responses to the queries that we get throughout the year, and that's the reason why we have really added probably more account codes than we would have done normally from that. And also, I guess the big change that we've made is that we have updated quite a few descriptions as well, which we don't normally do, but areas where, if description isn't quite up to date, or, it's maybe we've got two similar descriptions that are quite similar, then we've really made an effort to hopefully try and make those a lot clearer. But obviously you can please come back to us and let us know if they still don't make sense, or there's other things that we haven't picked up, then that would be great. As part of that questionnaire as well, we did ask for an overall rating of how easy the Academy Chart of Accounts was to use. And the majority of trusts came back with a 4 out of 5, which was great, but obviously we want to focus on the trusts who it wasn't working quite so well for. So hopefully we've gone some way to improving the usability of the Academy Chart of Accounts, but obviously we'll continue to look at any thoughts and queries that come through. They're always welcome. So because at the end of the day, we are trying to, we've kind of got a single chart of accounts which is looking after 2,500 separate entities. Obviously, you've got a similar brief in what you deliver, but everybody does deliver it slightly different. So it's kind of trying to cater for everybody, but also making sure that what we have does suit the majority of needs. So moving on to the new account codes, firstly looking at what we've set up in the balance sheet. So firstly, we've set up 4 new payroll control accounts, and these have come out of both sector queries over the years and also as a result of the questionnaire as well. So we set up 4 new account codes in there. There's one generic code currently, but we've now split that down into more account codes. You don't have to use them, but they are there for you to use if you feel if it's necessary. And then we've also set up a new account code for actuarial gains and losses, the recognised surplus, and that was born out of trusts during the last accounts return. Trust had a need. They were having derecognised surpluses on their actuarial statements, and there was nowhere to put them on the accounts return. So we've added a new accounts return this year field this year in the 23-24 accounts return. Obviously, this is for the 24-25, so it doesn't cover this year, but it will cover future years. So new incomer codes that we've added, again, just 3 incomer codes. So 2 of those are for new sort of emerging types of income that have come in that are relatively material and that trusts want to be able to keep a track of, and they are for the feed-in tariffs and also for electric vehicle charge point income. And I think that's probably things that trusts will want to report to on their trustees and maybe even benchmark on as time moves forward. So we've added those new account codes. The other one that we've added, the 525450, is for other reimbursement income from parents and staff. Now, there was nothing there that actually was an account code for anything where the school receives income for where they're not charging any element of profit or contribution towards fixed costs. So hopefully that will be useful there. Obviously, anything that's got a trading element still needs to go to a trading income account code. That is purely an account code to cater for those reimbursement of costs. So new account codes that we've set up for staff costs. Firstly, we've set up a new category within the direct costs area. There's no non-specific account code category for staff costs. So we've set this new kind of more generic one up for non-specific direct staff costs such as student pastoral and behaviour support staff. Hopefully that will be it in terms of setting up new categories. I don't think there's any more gaps. We have set a few up over the years since the chart of accounts came into fruition about 5 years ago. But hopefully we won't be needing any more of that, and I think we've probably got enough now to cover all bases. We've also set up a new account code for occupational health. That code is currently sat within supplies and services and will be deleted. Basically, it's because it's kind of sat in the wrong reporting sort of structure of the chart of accounts at the moment. So, understandably, trusts would rather report that under indirect staff costs. So we have moved it there. We've also set up 2 new account codes for professional subscriptions as well, and that's kind of another one of those other areas, not particularly material, but we had several queries for that over the years from trusts. So moving on to the premises cost area of the account chart of accounts. So firstly, there are 4 new operating lease codes set up. This kind of goes against the grain of setting up account codes sort of that are 5 years and more, because as we're all aware, we've got the IFRS 16 coming in soon, so we'll have to be definitely looking at the chart of accounts at some point in the near future to realign that so that trusts are able to report in a way that supports the IFRS 16. But the reason that we've done it is the top 2 are 2 codes that link into the new ICT BFR reporting requirement. So we felt it was whilst we kind of looked at the whole structure of it, in order that trusts can allocate costs to the right place and map them directly into the BFR categories, then it was kind of necessary to set up these 2 new account codes. And then we also set up 2 more account codes for solar panels and vehicles, and the main reason for those for setting that up is that they are both going to be quite material to the trust. So I mean, I think we've now got maybe all the correct operating lease codes there. So when it comes to IFRS 16, we'll still set up those. We'll kind of lift and shift those to where they need to be in a new structure. And then lastly, we've set up a premises code for accommodation service charge. So currently there's only an operating lease rent account code, which obviously doesn't cover that. But what we do suggest is to trust that they split out their accommodation charge from the other overhead charges, such as the building cleaning, reception services, if that's applicable. So those other costs would sit in your supplies and services properly, so that it's reporting into the correct area. And just as a note there, I've circled that last one because actually it's showing incorrectly. It shows correctly on the Academy chart of accounts itself, but there are a couple of places where it's got slightly the wrong code on it. So as soon as we've had the election, we'll be able to update the web page and put that correct account code in there. But it is correct on the chart of accounts itself. So moving on to supplies and services. Firstly, we've set up 5 new supplies and services account codes for ICT. So that is to deal with, again, the new BFR ICT reporting categories. So I'll show you in the guidance later, but we've now got a account codes. As long as you split your expenditure onto the new structure of account codes, it will all feed in directly into the new BFR reporting categories. And then we set up 6 other supplies and services codes, and these are all a result of trust requests, and they are areas where either we've had a lot of requests for them, or they are quite specific and they're not something that you could set up your own local account code for under a current DFE account code. And then I think the one at the bottom, the tax tolls and congestion charges, that's obviously an emerging expenditure, which 5 years ago would have been very minimal, but that's going to be more and more common across trusts now. So just to go over the action for trusts. So just to note that these account codes are for 24-25 financial year. So yeah, look at them from the 1st of September. Your AR 23-24 still works alongside this chart of accounts for 23-24. And the reason for that is that year on year, we add new account codes, and but your FMS system, your supplier won't have upgraded your system to deal with that. And also the accounts return won't be set up for it either. So just some actions to take on there is obviously just to have a look. Most of those account codes are for trust benefit. The main one to look at is the reuse of the occupational health costs. Also, just a note that if you've got a separate budgeting system using the Academy chart of accounts, then also to make the updates on that as well. So probably the most important sheet to take note of is this deleted account codes list. So firstly, we've deleted the admin ICT cost code. So over the years, we've had a few queries from trusts sort of asking, find this code a little bit ambiguous because you've got other areas that pick this up and we don't really know what it's for. So when we did the review of the ICT codes for the new BFR categories, we did realise that it was a little bit confusing and not needed anymore. So we have deleted that account code. We've also deleted the occupational health account code that sits in supplies and services. and set up the new one within indirect staffing costs. And then we have deleted the expenditure codes only, not the income codes, just the expenditure codes, which are for specifically reporting teaching school hubs. So obviously that's going to be a minority of trusts, but for those trusts, previously there was a requirement to report those costs separately in the accounts return. So there's a separate table for teaching hub costs within the SOFA, and then there's also separate columns within the benchmarking for teaching schools as well. So they will also be removed from the accounts return 24-25, and so trusts can just report them either in with their figures for the academies, or they can choose they will be able to then choose to also include it within central services if they prefer, which they couldn't do previously. This is off the back of a requirement, or there's no longer a requirement within financial statements to report teaching schools on a separate table. There is still a requirement to add in a line if that value is material on the face of your I&E, but not as a separate table. So we have put some guidance on our Guide to Adopting Academy Chart of Accounts, basically just to say, in future from 24-25, those trusts should use those the other the other chart of accounts codes as you would normally for the rest of your business, but allocate the teaching school hub cost to a separate cost centre, which I'm sure is happening anyway. So hopefully that makes that a little bit easier. So again, just some actions to note around deleted account codes. Is that the DFE won't reuse those account codes for at least the next 5 years, and hopefully longer than that. And for that reason, to make sure that they aren't reused, we do leave them on the chart of accounts, but we strike them through and put a do not use by them, just to make sure, if I leave and somebody else turns up, that they know that those codes aren't to be reused, because we do realise that those figures can be sitting around in your historical data for some time. Again, as with the new account codes, these changes only are for the 24-25 financial year moving forward, and you should continue to use the existing 23-24 codes alongside the AR. And also your financial management system software suppliers will also be aware of these changes, and they will update your databases. And again, just to obviously, really important to check to review if you're using any of those account codes, which we're going to be deleted, and take action to use an alternative account code. And again, if you're using a separate budgeting system that has the Academy's chart of accounts, to just again use the same criteria as you are from your general ledger account codes, and to move that reporting. So moving on to the mapping changes, there's just an extract here that shows where you can see all those mapping changes, because there are quite a few within the Guide to Adopting the Academy Chart of Accounts. This year, all of the mapping changes are to the BFR form, and that's because we are using automated data to populate the first third of the BFR this year. So we've been using kind of real test data and running that through, and we've actually come up with a whole bunch of changes. So even if you're completing your BFR manually, we've updated the mappings on the 23-24 as well as the 24-25. So if you have a look on the web page, and look at the chart of accounts there, that's got the most up-to-date mappings, which I think will be really helpful to you completing your BFR. So with the mapping changes, because the updates to the chart of accounts are always forward-looking in terms of adding and deleting new account codes. So we will never add or delete new account codes within year, but we will make mapping changes within year, and that could potentially happen until the end of August. So I don't think that there's anything else that's going to be changing this year. I think we've done all the changes. So, but just to again be aware, for doing your accounts return, for doing your BFR, use the most up-to-date 23/24 version that's on the webpage. Always check that rather than using one that you might have saved on your desktop. So the mapping, actually, as Zeno mentioned earlier, the mapping does take place in your, but if you automate your accounts return, it does take place kind of on the DFE side. It doesn't take place in your supplier system, but just to be aware that your suppliers may have set up reports based on this mapping. So it's just to, I guess, make sure that any changes that DFE put through on the mapping that your suppliers have also put through on the reports. We do update them to let them know when there's new versions out there, but that's kind of just a double check. So just to note some other changes, as we spoke about earlier, we have made several description changes this year. Again, we've just put a little extract there from the update that's available in the guide to adopting the Academy Chart of Accounts to show you what all those changes are. But hopefully that will make the Chart of Accounts a lot more useful. And we've also changed some of those descriptions as well for the new ICT categories. So using the same codes, but changing some of the descriptions slightly to make them kind of fit to those categorizations. We've also added 2 new columns. So for anybody that's using is automated the data for BFR, we've added a couple of extra columns into the mapping spreadsheet just to show the signage changes and so what it needs to show us in the form, what we've done to your data in order to automate it into the BFR. Okay, so finally, just to look at the guidance updates as well that we've made. So firstly, we've made quite a few updates to the account code guidance. So that's guidance on an individual account code basis. We've only got it on the I&E at the moment. We'd love to have it out for the balance sheet as well, but that's definitely it will be a nice to have, but it's somewhere on the list. As you can see from this extract here, all the yellow, where we've got yellows all the way across, that's where we've added new account codes. Some account codes we've just changed the description. Some we've changed just the account code description, and some we've changed the description and the guidance. So there's a whole mixed bag. Strongly suggest you look at those because that is the big change to the area. Unfortunately, I mean we have really tried to keep those updates to a minimum, including the operating lease codes. We have had to set up 7 new account codes in total. But that was after doing a lot of work to see what can we reuse that we've already got. But hopefully, if you kind of use those in that way, then the mapping should be easy to the new BFR ICT codes. And then we've also made some changes to the guide to the adopting the Academy Chart of Accounts, which is a little bit more of a general guidance. Appreciate it's a little bit confusing having 2 separate areas of guidance, but obviously the account code guidance is very specific to each account code, and the guide to adopting the Academy Chart of Accounts, the section 4, that is more sort of generic guidance if it applies to more than one account code. So for example, recharges are included in that. So we've added 2 new sections, one for teaching school hubs and and that's around removal of those account codes, and also for the pension surplus deemed irrecoverable, and that's around the additional of the new account code, but you can't use it for 23-24 because it's not there. Just some guidance on that. It also includes as well, Section 5 shows all the updates that we've made to the chart of accounts this year. So just some final points to note. There are areas within the accounts return 23-24 where if you're using automation, then you would need to do some manual reallocation. The first one is for COVID-19 funding. Hopefully this will be the last year of that. There's also the funds tables within the accounts return. The data is automated into them, but then they do have to be manually reallocated, and that is because the account code structure would have to be very complicated in order to deal with that. Then there's the new accounts return, the new accounts return field, which I've mentioned a couple of times already, that you'll have to be manually reallocate funding to the pension surplus deemed irrecoverable. And then there's also a new requirement in the AR and the financial statements this year to report other employee benefits. So actually there's a new account, the new field in the accounts return is on the staff cost table. So it's not an area, and it's not a table that we do automate information into, but it's probably one that we could kind of have a double mapping into it. We have looked at doing that, but the other employee benefits, it will need to be pulled from a few account codes, and we have looked at maybe what that could look like, and I think it would be useful to get feedback from trusts once they have done that for this year's accounts return and financial statements to see if there is something that if we do map that that staff cost table, how that could work for other employee benefits as well. Again, just a note here around the new BFR ICT categories. So we haven't added any new account codes for the capital area, and the reason for that is that we would have to add an incredible amount of account codes to make that work. And actually, there also isn't physically the room within in the Academy chart of accounts to do that. And also, it would be, we feel it's probably sort of more minor expenditure within there. I mean, there are already account codes there for it for spending IT spend. It's just not broken down into the same way that you'd need it for your for the BFR ICT field. So we have put some suggestions on there about how you might sort of work around that. Obviously, from a revenue point of view for 23-24, we will also not set up for that because this has kind of come out mid-year. But we have got some guidance on where you would pull that data from on the existing chart of account structure. And then for 24-25, we have now got that mapping in place, one-to-one mapping. Just as a brief shout out that if you're thinking of using automation for 23-24, to start the conversations early with your auditors, because obviously they're also a crucial party in that process. But and if we'll put in comms out there soon, and if you want a one-to-one meeting with your auditor and your trusts to kind of get in touch with us, and we'll arrange that later in the year. Over to you, Zeno.
Thank you very much, Nikki, for running us through the technical bits of the chart of accounts. So if we have any further questions after this webinar, you can contact us via our customer center help portal, quoting Academy chart of accounts. We also have an email box which you can send mails to. That's the Academy chart of accounts at education.gov.uk. Then there's also the FD forum, but for now, the FD forum should not be used till after the election period. You can use the other area, areas which you can contact us. We also have some more dialing sessions, mapping workshops, and you can find links to this on the gov.uk web page.